Okay, so in America, they've been setting warehouses on fire. There's at least 9 or 10, maybe more, warehouses that have been set on fire. And on social media, they're celebrating it. On social media, they're celebrating it. You think it's a revolution. You think it's a resistance, don't you? You're calling these people heroes who are setting these fires, calling it the beginning of something. Well, you're not necessarily wrong about that. Something is beginning. You are starting something, but I don't know if it's what you think you're starting. I don't know if you're starting what you think you're starting. I need you to understand something. You need to understand this. And you need to understand it deeply, not just intellectually. You need to understand this in your bones, because if you don't understand it, it's not a small mistake. It's not a small mistake if you don't understand this. This isn't the difference between tactical opinions. This is the difference between being a free people with a future and walking willingly, walking enthusiastically, and filming yourself as you go, walking into a cage, walking right into a cage. Those fires are not a revolution. I said they're not a revolution. Those fires are the justification for a counter-revolution. They're a justification for a counter-insurgency. Do you understand? Let me start with the specific fire that everyone is talking about, that one in California, the Kimberly-Clark warehouse fire in Ontario, California, because the specific details of that case, I think, are quite instructive, and they should, if you understand the details of that case, you should understand that situation clearly. Then you won't be able to be confused about how corporate power actually works from here on out. The arsonist in that case was a worker, and presumably he had real grievances about his conditions, about his pay, as he said in the video, about his treatment and so forth. He burned that warehouse down. And he maybe thought, when he burned that down, that he was hitting Kimberly-Clark. He might have thought that he was hitting that corporation, he was hitting that company. But that's not what he did at all. That building, that warehouse, is owned by a company called Real Estate Development Associates in California. It's a property company. REDA. It's not owned by Kimberly-Clark, and the warehouse was being leased and operated by what was called NFI Industries, which is a logistics contractor, not Kimberly-Clark. The arsonist himself worked for NFI Industries. That's who his real complaint was with, not with Kimberly-Clark. Kimberly-Clark was the client. Kimberly-Clark was just a name on a contract. Their products just moved through that facility managed by NFI Industries. You understand? That was the only connection that they had to that physical space. So let's talk about who actually got hurt, who he actually hit. REDA, the building owner, the local real estate entity with no connection whatsoever to his grievances. Now their asset has been destroyed. Their property is gone because of him. Now they're going to face insurance claims, a process that could take years and years and years. Potential disputes over the coverage, what's going to be covered, what's not going to be covered, right? They're going to have possibly, most likely, gaps between what the insurance is going to cover and what actual replacement and rebuilding is going to cost. They didn't have anything to do with that worker's grievances. They just own the building. And now that building is ash because of him. He destroyed an asset that belonged to someone who never did anything to him. And then NFI Industries, the one that he worked for, the contractor, the logistics contractor, they're going to face potential contractual liability to Kimberly-Clark for supply chain failure, supply chain disruption, whatnot. They're going to have their own reputational damage in the logistics market. The legal cost of having employed that arsonist to begin with, they might be liable for that. They're going to have operational disruption that it could spend months for them to try to recover from. And then he hurt the workers, the arsonist's own colleagues, his own fellow workers, the people who sat next to him in the break room, the people who probably shared his frustrations, the people who probably understood what his daily experience at that job felt like. They lost their jobs now. Immediately, their income is gone. Their health coverage is gone because, yes, NFI, that logistics provider, they provided health care. They provide medical, dental, vision, prescription coverage. They paid $18 an hour. They had 401ks. They paid time off. They have paid parental leave. Now they don't. Their routine, their livelihood, their immediate economic security is gone because of him. Not Kimberly-Clark's executives. They're not hurt at all. You hurt the workers only. You only hurt the workers. As for Kimberly-Clark, they just called a logistics manager. Another logistics manager found another contractor, found another warehouse. You understand? They had redundancy built into their supply chain system before the smoke even cleared. Their stock price, Kimberly-Clark's stock price, barely moved because the financial markets would have known that a fire in somebody else's warehouse changes nothing about Kimberly-Clark's earning potential, their earning capacity, what that company is worth. That's what the markets would have seen, and they're right. Not to mention, obviously, these companies have insurance, and they don't just have insurance the way that you and I have insurance. They have industrial scale risk management, a whole risk management system. They have entire departments whose function is to ensure that no single physical event no catastrophic event, no fire, no flood, or what have you, can materially damage that company's financial position. Everything in that warehouse was insured. You didn't hurt them. Even the losses that do exist are partially going to be subsidized by the public through tax treatment of casualty events. The government, meaning working people, working people's taxes, working people's tax contributions, are going to partially cover what the fire cost. You burn down their warehouse, but you will also pay at least part of the bill for rebuilding it and for paying them back and for compensating them. I don't think people understand where corporate wealth actually lives. The model that most people have in their head is more sort of a simplistically feudal model. That's pre-financial capitalism. You understand? You imagine that wealth is located in physical things, in buildings, in inventory, in equipment, and tools and whatnot. And that if you destroy those things, then you destroy those corporations' wealth. Well, that model hasn't been accurate for over 50 years. Kimberly-Clark's actual wealth, the source of their actual power, the thing that makes it Kimberly-Clark in the first place, is not any warehouse. It's the brand. It's the contracts. It's their market position. It's their intellectual property. It's their data. It's their financial instruments. It's the regulatory relationships that they have, the political access that they have, the captured legislation that protects their market dominance. None of that was in that warehouse. You could burn every single physical facility that Kimberly-Clark operates in and not even touch the actual source of their power, not touch the actual source of their wealth, because that's not where their wealth is or where their power is. Their wealth and their power is in a place where your match or your lighter could never reach. Look, I said Kimberly-Clark doesn't directly employ warehouse workers. They don't. They contract NFI, and NFI employs the workers. What that means in practice is that Kimberly-Clark has no direct employment relationship with the people who constitute their own operational capacity. Wrap your head around that. They have no direct liability for their conditions. They have no direct accountability for their wages, no accountability for their safety, for their grievances, or for their dignity. The contractor company absorbs all of that. So the arsonist's anger, whatever justifiable or understandable frustration that he had that was underneath his grievance, that was caused by and it was directed against a corporate structure that already ensured that he could never touch them, that he could never damage them. The outsourcing model that caused his grievance also made him completely incapable of touching the source of his grievance. He couldn't even reach them. 3 layers of corporate separation stood between his lighter and his target. And he didn't even know it. Or if he does know it, he didn't understand what it meant. And obviously, they're going to respond. The private sector is going to respond. The corporate sector is going to respond. The government is going to respond. So let me tell you what's coming. Not what might come, not what maybe is going to be coming, what potentially is coming, what is coming, what's already being planned, what's definitely already being planned in their boardrooms and in security departments and in government agencies right now as a direct response to this act and to every other fire that's been set. Because this is the final brutal irony that closes the loop. The arsonist's act, whatever genuine grievances drove him to do it, is going to produce direct and measurable worsening of conditions for every warehouse worker in America, for every logistics worker in America. Yes, you're calling these people revolutionaries, but they are in fact functioning, whether knowingly or unknowingly, as the vanguard of the corporate security state. Yes, they are. They're the foot soldiers of the preemptive counterinsurgency that I've been telling you about. Things are going to get worse for workers. They're going to get worse for workers, not for Kimberly-Clark's board of directors or for their shareholders, not for NFI's executives, for the workers, for the people that man probably imagined that he was standing up for. No, you're going to have AI-powered surveillance systems in every warehouse and every logistics center across the United States. Every warehouse in America, every logistics center in America, they're going to be watching you like hawks. They're going to be monitoring every movement, all your so-called productivity. They're going to be scanning your facial expressions. They're going to be studying your behavioral patterns in real time, continuously, without pause. You understand, I've told you before, the state views their own population as their number one enemy. That's how the state does. They view their own population as their number one enemy, their number one threat. And corporations and companies see their employees the same way. You know, Amazon, in their warehouses, they already had monitoring infrastructure that was absolutely dystopian in Amazon warehouses, the way they ran things. It was so dystopian, they even had to hold congressional hearings about it. Well, that's going to become now the industry baseline. It's going to be it used to be a controversial outlier, the way Amazon did things. Now that's going to become the mandatory standard, believe me. Because now there's a security justification. And security justifications are almost impossible to argue against, even for civil liberties organizations, without making you sound like you support criminals, that you support arsonists. You're going to be tracked from the moment you enter that facility to the moment you leave. Every movement is going to be logged. Every deviation from expected behavioral patterns is going to be automatically flagged by some kind of an AI system for maybe for human review or for AI generated action taken against you. And obviously it's not going to stop once you leave the job. No, your online activity is going to be looked at as well. Did you ever express any anti-corporate, anti-capitalist opinion on social media, on the internet? Did you like a post that spoke positively about Luigi Mangione, for example? They're going to be watching you now. They're going to be watching you like they never watched you before. Being an employee now is going to mean that you are under ongoing continuous investigation throughout the duration of your employment. And of course, pre-employment as well. Pre-employment screening is going to be even worse. It's going to start to include, if it hasn't already, criteria for employment that is explicitly ideological, not just criminal background checks. Social media history is going to be reviewed. There's going to be psychological profiling of workers. Psychological profiling of anyone who's even applying for a job. They're going to check so-called extremism indicators that are going to be defined by criteria that is so opaque. That's going to be administered by third-party firms, not even the company that's hiring you. You're not going to have any recourse whatsoever if you get screened out of the employment process. You're going to have entire categories of workers. Workers with grievances. Any workers who have ever expressed frustration publicly. Workers who follow the wrong accounts on social media. They're going to be quietly eliminated from the hiring pool with no explanation offered and no explanation required. And on the job, like I said, because companies want to look good, because the companies want to look like they care, because they want to look like they're taking care of worker grievances and they take worker well-being seriously, now you're going to impose policies that are going to force workers to perform contentment about their job, about their workplace. You understand? Because don't we treat you good? Don't we have happy slaves on our plantation? No, you're going to have so-called mental health monitoring on the job. And it's going to be framed, always framed, as wellness programs, employee wellness programs, as care, as the company investing in their people's well-being, their employees' well-being. You're going to have mandatory psychological assessments where workers are going to have to demonstrate compliance. They're going to have to perform, like I say, contentment about their jobs. What they want is documentation to insulate themselves from any blame. They want a paper trail that shows that on this date, such and such worker presented as stable, presented as content, presented as non-threatening. That protects the company, doesn't protect the worker. You're going to have to dance for them now, even more. Yes, boss, we're one big happy family. We're one big happy family. Please don't beat me. That's going to create an incentive system, a very powerful, career-defining incentive system where expressing genuine grievance is going to become a threat to your own livelihood. You understand me? You're going to learn very quickly that the only correct answer to how are you doing is fine. It's always fine. I'm always fine, always managing, always grateful for the opportunity to work here. It's tyrannical. And that great, heroic, brave revolutionary is leading the charge to empower that tyranny. Do you understand? Even when you have authentic human distress, legitimate, rational distress about legitimate, rational injustices in your job, you're going to have to perform contentment instead of seeking redress. You're going to have to mask it. You're going to have to suppress it. You're going to have to present the required happy face of contentment while the actual conditions that generated the distress and the discontent are going to remain completely structurally unchanged. And in fact, they're only going to get worse by the fact that you now have to pretend everything is wonderful. You're going to have to pretend that everything is wonderful. If you even file a claim at the Human Resources Department about any sort of mistreatment or any sort of mental health issue on your side, you're going to be flagged for that. Not for treatment, but for expulsion. You have to understand how corporations work. You have to understand how corporations work, how all tyrannies work, how the state works. Understand that your grievance is never the problem that they have to solve. Only the expression of your grievance is the problem that they have to manage. So this is what's coming for warehouse workers, for blue-collar workers, for logistics workers across the United States of America, as a direct result of this act and all of the other acts that have taken place that are allegedly, but not proven yet to have been arson. I mean, truth be told, this was always going to happen anyway, but these arsons and whatnot, these so-called revolutionary working class uprising actions, these actions are actually doing nothing whatsoever but to accelerate that process. You're accelerating what they were going to do anyway. Like I said, they only care about the brand. Understand, they only care about the brand, just like America only cares about the brand. Just like America. Companies don't care about the quality of their product. Companies don't care about the quality of their company, about the quality of their workplace, about the satisfaction of their workers. Companies only care about their image, just like America only cares about their image. America doesn't care about the quality of their society, about the quality of their system, or about the well-being of their people. They only care about the image. So you can expect you're going to see some statements coming out from Kimberly-Clark, from NFI, from industry associations, from warehouses, from logistics companies, from all sorts of companies. Language about worker dignity, language about their commitment to employee well-being and whatnot. Language about listening and learning and doing better, caring about people. Maybe they're going to establish some sort of a fund, some sort of a task force, some sort of a partnership with a nonprofit that has maybe credibility with the grassroots. And they'll choose an NGO or a nonprofit specifically because they have credibility that they can borrow in the service of their brand rehabilitation. You understand? While the real conditions in the workplace are going to get worse and worse and worse in real life. Don't you see how it works by now? None of it will touch the outsourcing model itself. None of it will touch the corporate model itself. None of it will even challenge the underlying predatory, parasitic logic of the corporate structure or the outsourcing structure. None of it is going to touch the contractor structure that insulates their brand, the company brand, from any direct accountability or liability to the workers. None of it is going to touch the calculations behind their wages. None of it is going to touch the surveillance infrastructure. The surveillance infrastructure in all of the workplaces that's being installed right now. In fact, they're going to use the surveillance infrastructure as part of their PR about the safety measures they're taking. We're watching you for your own safety. We're watching you for your own protection, for your own well-being, because we want you to be safe. We want you to be happy, right? We're not watching you because we're treating you so poorly. We know that we're treating you so poorly that we know that we have a reason to believe you're a threat. There's not going to be anything but cosmetic surgery for their brand. That's all. And it will work. It will work because it always works. It always works because the public doesn't even pay attention. The public doesn't even focus. It's being designed by people who have watched it work repeatedly for decades. So a worker with a genuine grievance, a grievance that was generated by a corporate structure that was specifically designed to insulate power from accountability, that worker commits an act of destruction. This is what happened in California and allegedly in these other places. Okay, you destroyed the livelihood of your own fellow workers, your own people. You damaged a local property owner who had no connection whatsoever to your grievances. And you left the actual target, the actual culprit, Kimberly-Clark, with nothing but a logistics inconvenience that they can resolve within weeks, if not days. You generated a federal domestic terrorism data point for the security agencies and the intelligence agencies. You triggered potentially an industry-wide escalation and acceleration of worker surveillance in the workplace that will make conditions measurably worse for every logistics worker in America, and after that for every other worker, for every other type of workplace in America. You help to produce a PR response that will perform accountability while structurally guaranteeing no accountability. And this all gets celebrated on social media as rebellion, as revolution, as resistance. You think that you're rebelling, but you're just being used. Now, full disclosure, I'll tell you, I first became well-known, I first became famous or infamous back during the days after Sisi overthrew Morsi in Egypt. And I was online suggesting tactics of system disruption, targeting Western corporations in Egypt for the resistance. Disruption without bloodshed is what I said. But blood was shed, and I got blamed for that, even though I had always explicitly said that no violence should be inflicted on anyone. Back in those days in the mid-2010s, I would have been advocating for actions similar to this one, most likely. But the context is different, you understand? Tactics are situational. Strategies are situational. It's always going to depend on the context. When I was talking in Egypt, I was talking about meticulous research on corporate ownership structures. I talked about supply chains, investigating supply chains, knowing who the investors are, what they're doing, what they want, what the corporation's plans are, what your demands are, what the corporation's agenda was, what they're trying to do in Egypt in the mid-2010s. Listen to me, California in 2026 is not Cairo 2013. Your situation is very, very different. So just because I advocated one particular type of a strategy 10 years ago in post-revolution, post-coup, post-Arab Spring Egypt, doesn't mean that that particular strategy is universally applicable in all places at all times, no matter what. No, it doesn't make sense now. In America, it doesn't make sense, not at this time. I had two major principles when I talked about Egypt. The strategies or tactics that you advocated must, number one, not cause any harm to the people, and number two, should not be directed against the government. Because what we wanted was stability and sovereignty. That was what our main concern was, my main concern was. And people were hot at that time, you understand? They were hot at that time, coming off the tail of the Arab Spring, coming off the tail of a revolution, of a coup, and so forth. And the last thing that I wanted to see was for Egypt to devolve into a Syria-style civil war scenario that would make them even more vulnerable to foreign investor and foreign corporate conquest. So I tried, at that time, those some 10 years ago, I tried to suggest what I thought were more constructive strategies than armed jihad. And I got demonized for that. I was literally called shaitan on the Egyptian state media at that time. I mean, excuse me for the digression. Excuse me for the digression. But what this man did in California, and what apparently several other people have been doing across the United States with their arson attacks on these warehouses, and what people on social media have been calling revolutionary, it resembles what I myself might have called revolutionary a decade ago in the context of Egypt. So I feel the need to try to clarify on this issue for a reason, based on my personal experience. First of all, I didn't have any direct connection whatsoever to any groups on the ground in Egypt. So it's impossible for me to even judge to what extent anyone was influenced by what I wrote, because that's all I was doing. All I did was post my opinions and suggestions on the internet. And when somebody decided to firebomb a KFC, I got blamed for that. Not because it was firebomb, because I never advocated anything like that, but because it was a KFC. Because it was a Western company, and I was almost the only person in the Egyptian discourse who was talking about disrupting Western corporations and Western companies. So anytime a Western company got targeted, I got blamed for that, even if the tactics that were used to target it were counter to anything that I ever advocated. So one of the things that I learned from that is that this strategy that I was advocating requires too much research. It requires too much calculation, too much planning, too much restraint, too much forethought, too much economic education to really even be feasible when you're dealing with hothead revolutionary types. You understand? So it's always inevitably going to go sideways. That's the truth. These are emotional people, angry people, often uneducated people, and impatient people. So all that they hear is company bad, company enemy, attack company, and then they'll go out and do something stupid and destructive. And it doesn't matter what you actually said or what I actually said. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how intellectual it was. It doesn't matter how well thought out it was. You're going to get called inciting terrorism. You're going to get called inciting violence because of what somebody else did who didn't even understand what you said. Just like I got accused in the New York Times and multiple other so-called journalists. And what you also learn from this, what you also learn from the experience that I had is that, yes, the truth is that corporations and the private sector are absolutely the most important players in the power structure. Absolutely. And they will come at you with full force if you challenge them in any way whatsoever. They're going to demonize you. They're going to slander you. They're going to attack you. They're going to mischaracterize you. They're going to assassinate your character. They're going to misrepresent your ideas in every which way, because nothing triggers them more than that. Nothing triggers a backlash from the power structure more than that. And I've been living with the consequences of that. I've been living with the consequences of that mischaracterization. I've been living with the consequences of that slander and that misrepresentation ever since. But the point is, why I'm telling you this is to let you know that I am not in principle against a strategy of disruption. I've always expressed my admiration for the tactics that were used by the early labor movement in the United States, which were often very militant. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that whatsoever, if it's effective and necessary. I'm not rigidly pro or against any strategy, and I do not subscribe to nonviolence on the basis of moral principle. I do not regard inanimate property as having the same value as human life. Absolutely not. But what I do believe in is effectiveness, and that includes making sure that your tactics, that includes making sure that your strategy will not predictably make things worse. And I'm saying that even in Egypt in 2013, 2014, 2015, even though the strategies and the tactics that I was suggesting at that time, I tried to tailor them to the very specific and unique situation and unique context of Egypt. Even though I was doing that, those tactics and those strategies were ultimately not feasible because they could not be pursued in any sort of a responsible manner. So what about America in 2026? The context is completely different. Your situation is different. Your population is different. The conditions and the circumstances are different. The power dynamics are different. The stage of corporate capture of your country is vastly more advanced in America today than it was in Egypt in 2013. The trajectory of that country is already on an irreversible downward spiral. If you pursue that sort of a destructive strategy in the United States, believe me, you are not doing anything but help the power structure to do what they were already planning to do. You're accelerating it. Because look, these warehouse fires are not the whole story. They're just an element in a much larger story. And to understand that story, you have to understand what's being built around all of this, and you have to understand the context, like I say. So, okay, you've got people now in America setting fires. They're setting warehouses on fire. And social media is calling that a revolution. But I'm telling you that the romanticization of these acts is much worse than just a misreading of tactics or misreading of strategies. It is unwittingly the operational layer of a much larger project. Because ask yourself the very simple question. It's a classic question. Who benefits? Not who feels like they benefit. Not who gets a dopamine hit because they watch the warehouse burn. You see something dramatic and it gets you excited. Ask yourself who actually structurally benefits from distributed acts of property destruction being framed as class war. The security state benefits. The surveillance industry benefits. The private contractors whose whole business model is rapid response to threats benefits. Their business model is threat prediction. They benefit. The legislators benefit who need a justification for expanding the legal measures that they can use for domestic repression. Every warehouse fire is a data point. You understand me? Every warehouse fire is a data point. Every social media post that celebrates it is a data point. And every person who shared that celebration is now going to be in a monitored category. The threat profile gets richer. The justification gets clearer and cleaner. The budget gets larger. Haven't I been telling you that the military-industrial complex is going to be developing the domestic market and the European market to pivot their profit model away from the global south, away from conflicts in the global south, to start making their money off of you? That's what's happening right now. You burn down a warehouse, you fund Palantir. You've got your constitution, right? You've got your civil rights, your civil liberties and so forth. You have your democracy. You're different. Well, the Algerians under French occupation thought that they had rights too. You understand? The French didn't arrive in Algeria announcing we're here to oppress you. They said we're here to make things better. That's what they said. The French said we're here to make things better. We're here to bring you into modernity. We're here to integrate you into a superior system. The language was the language of benevolence. And then they built quadrillage, a grid system that divided the entire civilian population into mapped out sectors. Every person accounted for, every movement tracked, every community under continuous surveillance. I'm not talking about military surveillance, population surveillance of the whole people, not just watching so-called militants, not just watching so-called rebels, the whole population, everybody mapped and monitored. And when resistance emerged, because resistance always does emerge, because that's how people do. People resist oppression. That's how people are. When that resistance finally did emerge, the French used that resistance to justify regroupement, forcible relocation of the civilian population into enclosed, monitored settlements for their own protection. Over 2 million people. Subhanallah. And yes, even if resistance did not emerge in Algeria, even if it hadn't, they would have pretended that it did. Doesn't that sound familiar? The British did the same in Kenya. Over 1 million Kikuyu people were relocated into enclosed camps, concentration camps, screened and classified, detained without trial. And the British told the world, and they told themselves, that it was for security purposes, that it was a legitimate security operation against so-called terrorists, against the Mau Mau. But most of the people that they detained had never even raised their hand against anyone. But you see, the infrastructure existed just like it exists in America, and the infrastructure was used. The infrastructure always gets used. Remember that. Whatever they tell you it's for initially, it doesn't matter. The infrastructure is going to get used. And if there is no use for it, why, they're going to make a use for it. Do you understand? So if you're making in America, and you are, an infrastructure for counterinsurgency, then it means that they're going to make the insurgency whether you make it or not. Please understand me. They're making a homeless detention facility in Utah right now, officially for homeless people, that they're going to detain without their consent. And when you hear that, that's fine. It's not me. I'm not homeless. I have a home. It doesn't apply to me. That's exactly what they want you to think, how they want you to react, as if they can't make you homeless anytime they want. No, you don't build mass detention infrastructure for homeless people. You make mass detention infrastructure when you have every intention of detaining the masses. You start with a population, yes, that no one will defend, like the homeless, like undocumented immigrants, so that you can normalize the facility. You can normalize the legal framework. You can normalize the process. You establish the precedent. You establish the precedent that administrative detention without criminal conviction, without trial, without charge, is an acceptable tool of social management. You establish that precedent, and then you just expand the eligibility criteria. You always expand the eligibility criteria. You always broaden the definitions. What constitutes extremism? What constitutes threat? What constitutes domestic terrorism? We know very well. Muslims know. Muslims know very well how this works. You've been doing it to us in America for decades. First, you do it with a control group, and then you deploy it to others. Everybody outside the United States, believe me, everybody outside the United States can see very clearly what's happening over there. And certainly everybody in the global South recognizes it because you did it over here first. And like I say, we Muslims in America, Muslims in the West, we know immediately, because you infiltrated all of our mosques, you infiltrated all of our masjids, you infiltrated all of our organizations, you infiltrated all of our gatherings. Muslims know immediately there's someone who is up here talking about setting fire to this or setting fire to that. Someone who comes in the mosque talking about blowing this up or blowing that up or trying to tell us to take drastic actions or whatnot. Well, we know right away that you're working for the intelligence. Yes, because we know that if you want to have a war, like America said in 2001, that they want to have a war against Islamic extremism, so-called, then the first thing you have to do is manufacture extremists. That's why you came to our mosques. That's why you're even in our mosques in the first place. You didn't come to our communities to find extremism. You came into our communities to plant extremism. And when you can't find it, and when you can't successfully plant it, or can't successfully fabricate or manufacture it, then you just expand the definition of what extremism is until it includes everybody. I'm telling you, they've got you trapped in a game. They're provoking you, and they've been provoking you. They've been provoking you for a long time. And when you allow yourself to get provoked, when you respond to their provocation, you have to understand that you're not doing something that they were not ready for. They were literally provoking you to do it. That's exactly what they wanted you to do because it's exactly what they are ready for. That's what they're ready for you to do.